Friday. Try to hang on for a little bit longer. Just have 2 more full weeks classes. All right, so with that said, does anyone know where standing on today? I did get an email from Walter. But I had not heard from something. I was just curious. Can we take out your separate piece of paper or index card and take a look at the pivot core charts that I had you do for today? I think there were 4 of them. All right, so, did anyone have a question about one of these pivot core charts?
I should ask, when we have it coming along, we do not eliminate 1 of 5. Isn't like,
Oh, no. You only cross out the ones that are impossible.
okay, so it should.
So there's other ones that may be possible that will have a 5, but I would just never circle those.
Okay.
As
Yeah.
the best possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah, I hope, I want to make that clear. So you only have to X out columns that will be impossible common core between the 2 keys. That is, if the Roman numerals quality or type is different, then you definitely cross out those columns. Leave all the other columns alone as possible or potential, even if they might be weak or poor pivot cores. And then out of those that are left, then circle the strongest or the best one. That's kind of what I like when my students get into the habit of doing. Are there any other questions about any of these pivot core charts? I think instead of collecting this, I'd like to give you a brief quiz. But we'll do that after we take a look at the answers on this. So I'll start by, well, if you can read my writing, start by showing the pivot core charts that I have up here. The first one was a modulation from a pivot core chart for modulation from A flat major to D flat major. And I hope your pivot core chart looks something similar to mine.
If you chose a different one, is it wrong?
If you circled a different one? In this case, I think so. And you know why that one that I circled is the best one of all? Because it's a predominant chord in both of the keys. And whenever that happens, that's kind of like the planets align, you know? And I mean, it's not that it's super rare, but whenever that happens, that's like definitely the best choice. No question about it. Because it's a predominant in the key of A flat, and it will function as a predominant in the key of D flat. Which one did you circle? I'm just curious. Okay, that would be a fine pivot chord. But I think the 2 becoming a 6, I think that will be the smoothest one to link the 2 keys. Yep. But what I look for when I create pivot chord charts, like when they come up on quizzes and tests, do you have the right columns crossed out? Do you have those 3 columns crossed out? Do you have all the other columns left alone that is not crossed out? Do you have the one circle that we just talked about that? Did you use the right type or quality of Roman numerals for all of the chords in the keys? These are the things I kind of look for. You know, if you have other questions, the next one I had from C minor to D minor. I guess I just kind of squeeze this one in there. You should have 3 columns crossed out again. 1, 2, 3, 4 columns left open and 1 column circled. I circled the 1, becomes 4. If you circled the 3 to 6, this one right here, instead, you would still get full credit. Because this pivot chord is a predominant in just one of the keys. That's also true of this one. But please don't circle like all of the possible, just one circle is all. Any questions about that one? The next group of keys was G major modulated to A minor. Again, 3 columns crossed out, 4 columns left open or alone, 1 column, one of those is circled, and I circled. The 2 chord in G minor would function as, or G major, excuse me, would function as a 1 in A minor. That seems to be a rather smooth piece of theory chord. Notice anything I circled does not have a 5 or a 7 involved in any of the keys. But I have to leave, technically I have to leave this pair of chords open, and I have to leave this pair of chords open, even though there's a 5 and a 7 involved, just because it's theoretically possible. That is a common chord between those 2 keys. One last one. B minor to A major. Your pivot chord charts look very similar to mine, I'm hoping. Is there any doubt, any confusion still in your mind about how to make one of these? Which form of the minor scale do you use to generate the chord qualities for a minor key? The natural one, that's right. And so the only things that's a little unusual about that, you can see in my mind, like my B minor row right here, is that the 5 is minor and the 7 is capital. And all the other chords are normal as we learned them last semester. Did you all make sure that after you listed the chords in the first key, did you all make sure you put you aligned the 1 and the second key under the proper chord? So that's a real big part of it. Make sure you calculate that correctly, otherwise the pivot chord chart is worthless. Any questions about how to find the 5 closely related keys to a meaning? Well, if you don't mind then, just keep your pencil out. And there's a half sheet quiz. Finding closely related keys, and then writing 1, 2, 3, 4. If you would be so kind, because I need something to do this week, not last week. Take a few minutes to fill this out to the best of your ability. Please use uppercase letters for major keys and lowercase letters for minor keys. Very well, put some touches on it, please, okay, just still working, I'll punch this out. No? You guess or? Okay. Well, it looks like you got a lot of it on this, so that's all I think. All right, so what we're gonna do today is, I kind of like today's class because, I like all of them. Anyway, but we're going to take a look at a concrete example that actually has a modulation. We're going to see it take place. We're going to see it happen in action, how it works and all that. I realized that I forgot, because I was just so excited about getting started, I forgot to return your homework. But everyone did very well on this assignment with the key relationships. So I'll get this back to you straight away here. So I have a very significant kind of important handout that I'm going to give you at this point too. So we can start talking about what steps do we need to take, or what's the procedure for analyzing a passage of music that modulates. How do we find the exact point of modulation? How do we analyze the modulation using Roman numerals, that kind of thing. So the handout I'm going to give you has a step-by-step process. There's about 4 steps there. And then after we go through those 4 steps, we'll take a look at a concrete example on the back. It's a nice short little vocal piece. And yeah, I kind of like the piece that we're going to use. Analyzing common chord modulations is the title. And it says, when analyzing a passage of music that modulates, follow the procedure below. Number 1, I think it's important, very critical. You can actually learn and gain a lot about just listening to the passage that you're analyzing. Because the ear can kind of tell approximately where the old key is no longer in effect, and where you've gone to a new key. The ear can tell that. Okay? So just by listening to a passage, it's really going to narrow, like say you have a passage of 16 measures, just listening to the passage is going to really narrow down the location as to where you think the common chord, the pivot chord is that links the 2 keys and brings about the modulation. So I can't, I guess I can't overplay or overestimate, listen to the passage carefully. And that's what we're planning to do once we get through these 4 steps here. Number 2, the next step is find the point of modulation. That is, find the first chord in the passage that appears to function more naturally in the second or new key than it does in the first key. This chord is called the signal chord, and I use that term very frequently in this class. The signal chord is named as such because it contains one or more of the following signals, or it actually is one or more of the following chords that I've listed here. What are possible signals that might alert you to the fact that you are looking at a chord that's functioning in the new key rather than the old key? Well, letter A says an accidental that belongs to the new key, but not to the old key. That's a signal, a visual signal, physical presence in the music that you can see that's going to help you find what I call the signal chord, and that's right around where the modulation takes place. Sometimes, letter B says there's an absence of an accidental that belongs to the old key. So for instance, let's say we are modulating from A minor to D minor. One accidental that's going to disappear once we leave A minor is G sharp. We won't have to have T in A minor to G sharp. It won't need to be raised any longer once we leave A minor. We're going to use G natural because that fits in D minor, but not in A minor. Does that make sense? Otherwise, sometimes the point of modulation, the signal chord, can be identified by letter C. Sometimes the signal chord is just a 1/6/4 or a potential 6/4 in the new key. There's really no other way to analyze that chord in the music except as a 1/6/4 in the new key. And if you can't analyze it in any way except as a 1/6/4 in the new key, then you know by that point you are already in the new key because it functions and is analyzable in the new key. Lastly, if you find a 5 chord, a 5/7, some kind of dominant chord in the new key, and it's analyzable as a 5 or 5/7 in the new key, that means you've already crossed the point, the threshold, you've already made it to the new key, and what you need to do is you need to just back up a little bit in the music and find out where the pivot chord is, where the common chord that connects the two keys is. Because this is the main relationship. In step 2 there, when you find the signal chord, which is all important, let's see, do I say, oh yeah. Let's skip step 3 for a second, I'll come back to it. Look at step 4. When you find the signal chord that's alerted you that you're in the new key, where is the pivot chord generally in relation to the signal chord? It's usually just one chord before it. And so it's going to look something like this. So this chord is going to have an accidental, or it's going to be a chord that signals or alerts you to the fact that, hey, we're not in the old key anymore. Once you find this chord, back up one chord, and that's typically where the pivot chord is. It's a chord that functions smoothly in both the old key and whatever the new key is. And I like what it says here in number 4. Underneath step 4 it says, bear in mind that the signal chord is the one that signals the modulation. The pivot chord does not signal the modulation, it simply smooths the modulation out. It simply gets you to gradually transition from one key to the next. And then this chord, the signal chord, is the first chord entirely in the new key. It's important to know that. The signal chord is always going to be the first chord that's entirely in the new key. There's no vestiges, no remnants of the old key anymore by the time we get here. The last vestige or remnant of the old key is found in the pivot chord, and that's it. After the pivot chord, everything is in the new key, analyzable in the new key. Step 3, if I could go back to that, one thing that, just to cover your bases, it's important not to overlook step 3. When you find the signal chord in step 2, let's say it's got an accidental that tips you off, you're not in the old key anymore. What you really should do is you should look beyond the signal chord. Look further down the music in several of the following measures. And basically verify that a modulation rather than a tonicization is happening. Well, what does that mean? Those sound like really big words. I guess what we're saying is, let's say this signal chord has an accidental. Let's say it's a sharp that tips you off that you're in a new key and you're not in the old key anymore. What you want to do is you want to look further and make sure that this accidental consistently reappears until you get to a cadence, because that will confirm that a modulation and change of key is happening. If you find an accidental in what you think is a signal chord in a modulation, and it just occurs in that one chord, and then it never occurs ever again, then probably what you're looking at is just a secondary dominant or something, and not a full-fledged modulation. And when you have a secondary chord tonicizing the chord that follows, that brief span of time, that's called a tonicization. I've used that word before. But a modulation is different than a tonicization in that it lasts a lot longer. And a modulation is typically confirmed by a cadence at the end of a phrase in the new key. Little tonicizations like a second 5 of 5 going to a 5, they don't have any of that stuff. That's just too brief. But one of the biggest differences between a tonicization and a full-fledged modulation is time. Modulations last long. Okay, so let's see if we can turn the page over. Does anyone have any questions, by the way? I know it's kind of, at this point, theoretical, abstract, but turn the page over and we'll look at this example, and then we'll go through each of the 4 steps in turn with this example to find a modulation. Come on. System. So take a milk and take a break. Oops. Oops. Okay. So I found this is a little Franz Schubert piece, as you can see. It's called Ein Röslein, and just so you know a little bit about it, the German underneath the title, a little bit of that explains that this is a poem. The words were written by a lyricist named Goethe, and this, it says in German, it's for a singing voice with accompaniment on the piano. And the tempo there where it says lieblich, that means lovely, charming, or sweet. And the recording that I have off of YouTube is sung by a soprano. And this little song is just 16 measures long. That's all it is. And if any of you know any famous sopranos, Renee Fleming is one of the well-known, supposedly a well-known soprano. She sings soprano way better than I do. So there's 3 verses to this song. Let's just listen to the first verse right now. And let's see, is there something I was going to ask you to listen for before I play it? No, let's just play it first. Now, a couple questions I have for you right off the bat. Look at the key signature, first of all. And you can look at the first note, first chord, and tell me, what is the opening or the beginning key to this song? Yeah, G major. I would definitely say we got 1 sharp in the key signature, and the first measure is filled with a G major chord. Now, I'll tell you, the first phrase is 4 bars long, so there's a little cadence on the downbeat of measure 4. And then there's the second phrase is measures 5 all the way through measure 10. It's a little bit longer phrase. It's about 5 or 6 bars long. And my question to you is, look at measures 9 and 10. And I know you don't have necessarily the analysis there, but, well, really measure 10 should help give it away. Does anyone know what key cadence in measure 10? Looking at the bass, how it goes A down to D. And that's a D major. I'll play this again, of course, but the cadence in measure 10 is in the key of D. How, or where, is maybe the better question, did Schubert transition or shift from G major to D major?
Is it in measure 6?
Okay, good. So we listen to the passage. Where are my steps? Here we go. We listen to the passage. We're on step 2. Find the point of modulation. The first chord that appears to function more naturally in the second key is the first key. That chord is called a signal chord. And it usually has an accidental as a signal, or it is a cadential 6/4 or 5 in the new key. Lexi just mentioned measure 6. What do you physically see in measure 6 that tips you off? An accidental. That's right. Absolutely. Okay, so there's an accidental. Now, let me ask you this. If Schubert is modulating to D major, well actually I should say since Schubert is modulating to D major, what accidental do you think he would need that belongs to the new key of D, but that does not belong to the old key of G major?
C sharp.
C sharp, yeah. What's a good way to be sure about which accidental you're looking for? Think about the difference between the two keys, key signature. Right? G major has 1 sharp, F sharp. D major has 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp. What's the one accidental that's different between the two keys, key signatures, and you're starting in G and you're going to D? The only one that's going to be a really important signal that's going to get you to where you need to go is the one that's not in G, and that's the C sharp. So does it not make sense that Schubert is using a C sharp in measure 6? Because he's trying to get out of G and get into D. And it works so well. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, will you ever give us a piece where it modulates multiple times, or will you just have a one?
Later, I don't know if I give you any this semester, but like in a later semester, you'll have pieces that modulate 2 or 3 times. And it's in the span of just maybe 20 bars or 16 bars or something like that. But you'll have a lot more experience and practice finding those modulations by then. All right, so let's kind of do this now together on the board. And you can write, by the way, right on your handout, right in there. The chord, there's only one chord in measure 6. It's the same chord for the entire measure. It's got a C sharp, it's got the signal. That means that if the chord in measure 6 is the signal chord, it's the first chord that's fully, completely, entirely in D major. So I would like you to help me analyze the chord in measure 6 with a Roman numeral as if it were in D major. What notes do you have there? And just mostly look at the piano part, because that'll give you most of the notes there.
5, 7.
Okay, it's A, C sharp, E, G, and in D major that's a 5/7. Can we be really specific as to what inversion that 5/7 is?
5, 7 in
Third inversion, right? So isn't the chord a 5/4/2? It's a 5/4/2 in D. Good. Okay. So everything after this chord, all the way to measure 10 of the cadence, all those chords should be analyzable in D, because that's the key Schubert's in at that point. But how did Schubert get to this signal chord? How did he transition smoothly to get to D? Well, for that we have to back up one chord and find what we call the pivot chord. Okay, so look at the chord in measure 5. There's just one chord in measure for the whole measure. And again, look at the piano part mostly, left hand and right hand. Without giving it any Roman numeral, can you tell me, like, what's its root? What type of triad? Yeah, it's a G major triad, isn't it? Well, okay, we've already identified the first key of this piece is G major. The second key of the piece is D major. Does a G major chord fit in both keys? Yeah, it does. How does it function in G? There's a 1. And what Roman numeral would it be in the new key of D? And from there, it's just off to the races, home free and D major. Isn't that neat? It's not that complicated. It's actually quite simple when you know how it works and what to look for, and you understand what you're listening to. But that's really all it is. You just have to use a chord that fits smoothly in two keys, let it function one way in the old key, function as a second way in the new key, and boom, you're off to the races in the new key. And by the way, what will really confirm and help establish and solidify the new key is if you have several more chords in the new key and you end with a cadence in the new key. That's going to really convince the listener that a modulation, a change of tonic has taken place. And that's what we have, right? We have chords all through measures 7, 8, 9, and 10, all in D major, and then there's a cadence in D major to confirm to the listener that, hey, we are not in G anymore. All right, let's listen to the second verse. Now that you know all the action is happening around measure 5, especially measure 6, when the singer sings that C sharp on the way down, she has to make sure that that C sharp is very much in tune, because if it's more like C natural, the modulation's not going to sound convincing.
If we do get a piece where they repeat and so they technically modulate back to G, do you want us to analyze that?
No, you don't have to. You don't have to. All right, so let's listen to the second verse. This is all in G. Did you hear the C sharp? All these C sharps keep hearing. And now we cadence. Do you see also another thing? After we found the signal chord, you see how in measures, 8 and 9 and 10, you see how C sharps keep appearing again and again and again to confirm that we're in D major. That's what step 3 on the back side of your sheet is talking about. Those C sharps are like signposts that say, yes, you definitely are in the key of D. Okay? And then let's just finish up the second verse. Okay. Now, we could probably take a little bit of the time, and if you went into the last phrase or the last system, do you see how in measure, 11? Do you see on the bass there's a C natural? You see why Schubert needs to use a C natural? Because he wants to go back to G, and he wants to end the piece in the key he started with. So we could take the time to do that, but that's not really the main focus of this class. As long as you can find the signal and find out how Schubert modulated to D, and how to analyze that. Use this, this is the pivot chord symbol. That's what you use to show the pivot chord. Oh, and by the way, I should make it very clear that at the point of modulation, at the pivot chord, I always want you to show me the new key. If you do not show me and tell me what the new key is at the pivot chord, I'm going to take a point off. But you always need to show me so that I know that you know what the new key is that we're going to. All right. What else? Does anyone, let me pause here, does anyone have any questions about how to spot, how to look for, how to find a modulation between two keys? I think it's important to first of all determine what is the first key you're starting with. That's important information. Look further on down the line. There's a cadence in another key. In what key is that new key in? Then you've got your two keys involved. Then I would start thinking about or looking for a chord or a signal between the two keys. And very often the signal between the two keys is the difference, an accidental that's found, thinking about the difference between the two keys' key signatures. That's how you can identify what accidental will show up in the new key, which and that accidental will not show up in the old key. These are important things to think about. Because that's how you're going to find your signal chord, and whenever you find your signal chord, which is the first chord entirely in the new key, then just back up one chord and you'll find your hint, your link, your connecting pivot. All right, I'm going to, because there's only one more verse, I'm going to play the last verse. It goes very quickly. Any of you, especially, I don't know that this is, I don't know if there's a version of this for tenor voice or anything like that. But ladies, any of you that are in voice class or taking voice lessons, I encourage you to mention this piece to Dr. Farr. She knows about this piece. And I've had students in the past, female students, that after listening to this piece, they actually said, I want to sing this piece. And you can sing this piece if Dr. Farr is okay with that. I know she will. But anyway, I just think it's such a nice little piece. It can't be improved upon. It's just so simple yet so good. I do not, but I think yours line refers to some kind of rose or flower, I would imagine. I'd have to look it up. That is a good question. Dr. Farr would definitely know. Yeah, I mean, I wish I could, write 16 bars, as powerful as this, even though it's so simple. I don't know how you can really improve it. Perfect way it is. Okay, now what we need to do is I don't know if you have your workbook with you, but I want you to, if you do, I want you to take that out and open up to page 163, because I have to give you some slight hints to get you started on the analysis passage that's on page 163 in the workbook. I don't know, I mean, it's Friday. We just listened to this really nice, bright piece of music. Even if you're sitting in the Alright. So the assignment for Monday is to analyze this passage, workbook page 163, number 1. And my book says that this is a nocturne by somebody named I don't know, I can't pronounce that. Yeah, okay, that's probably better. I just say All right, now let's look at the instructions. The excerpt, it tells you right here, the excerpt at the very top modulates from B flat major to F major. There are your two keys right there. Starts in B flat major, it's going to end, by the time you get to measure A here, it's going to end in F major. Because the blanks beneath the music show where the bass changes, in other words, where the chords are that you have to analyze with Roman numerals, but the blanks do not indicate the location of the common chord or the pivot chord. You have to locate the signal chord and then back up one chord from there to find your pivot chord. Make sense? Okay. Non-chord tones in measures 1 and 8 only have been identified for you. Begin by supplying lead sheet symbols without slashes above the staff and then provide the Roman numerals. In the assignment sheet, I say you do not need to do lead sheet symbols. Just ignore that part of the instructions. I just want you to analyze this passage with Roman numerals in the blanks provided. Now, really important that you remember here, it starts in B flat major, it goes to F major. Think about the two keys key signatures. What one accidental is going to start showing up in the music in F major for a note that belongs in F major that doesn't belong in B flat major.
E natural.
That's right, E natural, right? Because this key signature is two flats, B flat, E flat. This is just one flat, B flat. So that means from here, after you're in B flat major for a while, eventually you're going to have to start seeing some E naturals to get into and remain in F. So I guess what I'm trying to say is for the analysis of this piece, E natural is the most important, the most magical, all-encompassing signal that you want to look for. That's the only one that matters. Now, if you look in measure like 2, the second full measure, you see there's F sharps in the bass. If you look in measure 3, you see that there's B naturals and A flats. Do those accidentals have anything to do with going from B flat major to F major? No. So I don't want you to get all like, oh look, I found a signal. I don't want you to get, I mean you can get excited, but I don't want you to think that that's where the modulation occurs. Those accidentals are there probably because they're part of some chromatic chords in B flat major, maybe like a secondary dominant or a secondary leading tone. So still try to analyze those chords in B flat major. But it's not until you come upon an E natural and start seeing E naturals consistently appear in the music, that's where you want to actually mark the change of key. Does that make sense? So the other accidentals might be tempting, but they're misleading. It's really only E natural that's going to get us from that key to this key. Now, those of you that do have your book, where is the first measure that you see E natural appear? Measure 6. And you see how there's just one blank under measure 6. So you just have to analyze one chord and it contains the magic signal. So that's probably going to be your signal chord. Hint, hint. So that's the chord. That chord you're going to analyze in F. It's going to already be in the new key of F. Where do you go to find the pivot chord? Yeah, where's the previous chord? Well, look in the previous measure. Must be the second chord or something in measure 5. See if that chord, whatever it is, functions as a Roman numeral in B flat and also functions well and smoothly in F. It should. And at the pivot chord, I want you to show your new key. Starting in measure 6 all the way to the end, you should be able to analyze all the chords in F major. And there's one that's got a pitch missing that's very confusing. How can I tell you this without telling you this? The third blank from the end, those of you that have your music with you, that chord is supposed to contain a C, an A, and an F. There's no F in that chord. It's only got 2 notes, C and A. Let's see if I can show it. Yep, right there. See that chord there? It's got C, C, A, and then up above all it has is C. If you want to imagine or infer an F somewhere in the middle, that'll help you identify what Roman numeral that is. But the F would have to be up above. Don't change the bass note. The bass note has to be C. Now, before we go, I want to play this for you with the word recording. This is exercise 18.2A1. This is a very nice piece. It sounds great. Good job to Simon. Oh, shoot, I'm not on the right, hold on. Let's start at the beginning again.
Exercise 18.2A1.
that good? Can we call it a day? Have a good weekend? All right. Do it. Get some sleep. And we just got 2 more weeks, full weeks to go after this. for classes.
Oh, wow. I was gonna ask Dr. Robinson, but I don't think he's probably gonna say so.
Oh, what's on
It's a rap song.
You know, rap got like Eminem.
I don't think
When
so.
you did some of the, it sounds like there's a part in there that sounds like what she said.
What?
The music.
Oh, so,
Because he raps so fast it sounds like.
oh, yeah, I can't pronounce that name. I just say,